Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. So excited for this video as we're going to continue our trade guide series here on the channel with the Houston Rockets in this trade guide. Super excited for this one. If you guys are as well, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. I hope you guys do appreciate all of the work that goes into these videos. And without further ado, let's jump into it here, and I just want to urge you guys to make sure to go give a follow on Instagram and Twitter. Links are in the descriptions for those. Make sure to go give us follows over there. Then also go join the Discord. Links in the description for that. We have a lot of awesome Rockets fans in there, as well as fans of just other NBA teams in general. So it's a great place to be, great community, a lot of fun events going on in there, daily NBA Pick'em, and a lot of other great things as well. There's rewards and prizes for being a part of some of those games. So it's an awesome spot to be, and I would love to see you guys in there going forward. Now let's jump into the actual video here. Here's our video preview, and we'll start with the Rockets future draft picks. That's going to be a great starting point as we get to kind of know, hey, what do the Rockets have to work with on the trade market? What kind of assets do they have that they could theoretically send out in trades? We're also going to look at their current situation. How are they playing this year? What are my generic thoughts on the team? We'll go through that part pretty quickly, but then we'll especially touch on their needs, and that's going to kind of give us a good indicator of what they could potentially target later on. We'll look at their multi-year cap table. What contracts do they have to trade away? What are those potential trade pieces? Who could they send where? In what deals? We're going to talk about trade aggregation as well. How do they kind of combine some salaries to get some money to work in some of these packages? Then we're going to look at those actual trade targets. I have 4 specific trade packages built out for this video. A little bit different. I'm going above and beyond here for this trade guide. Typically don't build and flesh out real trade packages, but more so talk about, hey, these are guys I think the teams could target. But in this one, I kind of built real trade packages because I thought with Houston specifically, it was really important to hit on those points and touch on some of the players I think that could get traded to H-Town this season. And then we'll give my final predictions at the end of the video. Again, if you do enjoy, leave a like and subscribe. And let's get into it here with the Rockets draft assets, and we're specifically focusing on the first round. They owe their 2024 and 2026 first currently to the Oklahoma City Thunder. There are top 4 protections on that, so they have a little bit of leeway here. They're not going to have their pick this year. They're probably not going to have their pick in 2026, but luckily for them, they do own other first-round picks from other teams, most specifically the Brooklyn Nets. And those assets seem very desirable right now. The Nets are not playing great basketball currently. They've gone through kind of a recent losing skid. They've kind of righted the wrongs in the last couple of games, but they're still not playing great basketball. They don't look like a playoff team, which means the Rockets are going to be owning lottery selections from the Brooklyn Nets, maybe not even just this year, but for years to come. We're going to have that kind of play out in a couple of trade packages in this video as well. And they also own swaps in 2025 and 2027. So as the Rockets keep getting better, some of those young core pieces like Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, maybe as all of those guys start to hit their ceiling, they'll also be collecting more top picks from that Nets trade centered around James Harden. We know how good the Nets would have been if that team stayed healthy and if they stayed together. The reality though is they didn't. The Rockets now are in a position to reap the benefits from that. They also still do owe their own 2025 swap with Oklahoma City as well. So they owe a couple of things out the door, but they also own more than they owe. So they're still at somewhat of a pick surplus right now. They have a lot of their own future picks way down the road as well. So the Rockets, I think, are in a pretty good spot to make some trades. And honestly, as I was kind of prepping for this video, going through the work of putting together all the graphics and kind of rationalizing, hey, what could the Rockets realistically do this trade deadline? I feel very optimistic about this team, not only with the way they're playing right now, but with their actual collection of assets. And when you look at that current situation, what do I feel so good about? The team's really solid. I tweeted before the year saying, hey, the Houston Rockets are going to be a lot better than people currently believe. And I think that's played out so far. They're flirting with 500. They've been a game above it, game below it for a good amount of the season. And they're fighting currently for a playoff spot. They're in the play-in mix right now in the Western Conference. And I think if we looked at where this team was a year ago under Steven Silas, if I said, hey, 12 months from now, they'd be a playoff team or a play-in team, everyone would say, whoa, that's a drastic turnaround. That means they've made a ton of improvements, and they honestly have. The biggest one being Ime Udoka. What an excellent hire. I was super fond of that hiring as soon as they made that move. I thought if there's going to be a guy who can maximize Alperen Şengün defensively, get these young guys to guard, it's going to be Ime Udoka. He's done a great job limiting transition points. The transition defense specifically, I think, is one of the biggest turnarounds in NBA history maybe that I've ever seen. The Rockets looked like an AAU team a year ago to now being, I would say, the best transition defense team in the NBA. Ime Udoka is an excellent basketball mind, especially on the defensive end of the floor. I still think there's some things offensively he could do a little bit better. I have a video up on the channel about that centered around Jalen Green, but the team's playing great, and there's a lot to be positive about with Houston, especially given what their circumstances were, like I said, 12 months ago to where they are now. They're doing a fantastic job. Udoka's doing a great job. They've got a really good coaching staff in place. I think the development of their players is going to be something we see now over the next 2 or 3 years, whereas under Steven Silas, it felt like everything was kind of flatlined. There wasn't going to be development. Their players weren't going to impact winning, and now that's all changed, and that's really the indication of not only having a good coach, but having a better culture as well. So a lot of credit to Ime Udoka there. And when we talk about the actual trade needs, of course, this is one of the big important parts of the video. What does Houston need to add? A backup big man, I think, is at the top of the list. They signed Jock Landale in the offseason. I was not a big fan of that contract, although I looked at it and said, hey, look, it's at least, non-guaranteed for years 2 through 4. That was really the big salvation point in that contract for me. If it was a flat 4-year, $32 million deal with no opt-outs, I would say, oh my goodness. But luckily, Houston, they're able to opt out of the contract because of the non-guaranteed status of it. So ultimately, really no harm, no foul, other than the fact that they just don't have a quality backup big man right now. They're playing Jeff Green at small ball center a ton, and it's been pretty productive for them. I'm not saying it's terrible, but I don't think that's what the Rockets want to do, especially if you look at some playoff matchups. What if you get matched up with Minnesota or Denver or some of these other big teams in the Western Conference, maybe even like the Lakers in a play-in example with where the Lakers are currently seated? Like, that's a huge disadvantage for Houston, just given how much size some of these other teams present. So you do need another big man body in the room for sure. I also think that they could use more shooting. This video doesn't necessarily tackle shooting as much for some of their trade targets. I do have a high level 3-and-D wing in this video, and I'm saying really high level, a really good player I have possibly coming in the door for Houston this trade deadline. I have an example of that. The shooting, maybe they could go after a guy like Luke Kennard. Maybe they could go after a guy like Landry Shamet, who I would assume is available for pretty cheap in Washington. There's a lot of shooting type players that could fit in Houston. Now, my assumption is that's not their biggest goal. I think their biggest goal is going to be defense oriented. You look at what Udoka was doing in Boston before coming over to Houston, of course, in the 1 year he led the Boston Celtics to the NBA Finals. Most prominently, he played 2 big men all the time. Al Horford and Robert Williams shared the floor a ton. He's comfortable playing big. The Rockets don't really have that option right now, but I think as he gets his wish, and if they trade for a big man, they're going to have some real versatility there. So we're going to talk about that here soon. First, we have to explore their cap table and look at some of those tradable salaries. First of all, Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, both of them have played very, very well. Remember, I was live during free agency. They signed these 2 guys to massive money, and everyone was freaking out saying, oh my gosh, massive overpays. What are the Rockets doing? They're signing Dillon Brooks after his worst playoff performance ever, and Fred VanVleet, that's a lot of money. And I sat here and told everybody, look, the Fred VanVleet contract, maybe not something I would have signed myself, but he has been very good for the Houston Rockets. And again, there's team flexibility here. Only 2 more years on it, and only one of those 2 years is guaranteed. So really going into next year, it's an expiring contract. If a team wanted to look at it that way, that's a home run for the Houston Rockets, especially with how he's played. He's brought a good defensive intensity, and he's brought a lot of leadership to the Houston Rockets, which is exactly what they needed. Dillon Brooks, we know what he is on the defensive end of the floor. A really key piece of Ime Udoka's defensive system right now. In Houston, of course, he's been out a bit with an injury as of late, but Dillon Brooks is a really good player, and I think someone who got really overlooked based on how his tenure in Memphis ended. And I've never been a big Dillon Brooks guy myself. I always thought, the shot selection and his desire to be a shot creator for an offense was always kind of limiting his value. I think the Rockets have found a really good balance with that this season, where Brooks is able to do that every once in a while, but they found a healthy balance where it's not shooting them in the foot. I think with his contract too, the fact that it's descending going forward, the final year he's only making $19 million. Next year he's making $22, so it's not that big of a number, honestly. He's a starting caliber wing. He's been really nice for the Houston Rockets, and I don't know where they'd be without him. Jeff Green has 1 more year at about $9.5 million. That extra season is a team option. Victor Oladipo, this is a really nice trade chip to have here. Expiring contract a little bit under $10 million. And no, I don't mean trading Victor Oladipo because of value. I mean, he's a sizable salary you can aggregate into a deal. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Jock Landale, we mentioned him already, 3 more years. All of them are fully non-guaranteed, $8 million annually, tradable contract if you need to. Jae'Sean Tate, 1 more year on his contract after this season. He's making $6.5 million this year. That team option for next year is about $7 million. So when you get to trade aggregates, what can the Houston Rockets do? Well, they could theoretically aggregate the following salaries. Victor Oladipo, a little bit under $10 million. Jock Landale, exactly at $8 million. Jae'Sean Tate, exactly at $6.5 million. And if you aggregate those salaries together, and what I mean is if you add them all up, you're looking at about $25 million in salary. And because of that, depending on, maybe they only trade 2 of these guys, maybe they just trade 1 of these players, maybe they trade all 3 of them, you can take in a player from any salary range between $13 million roughly and $29 million. And obviously they could take in a smaller salary than that. If they traded Victor Oladipo, they could take anyone from $7.5 million to $11 million, realistically. Doesn't mean that they will, but if you're talking about aggregating, you're looking at anything from $13 million to $29 million, which gives you a really wide range of salaries for potential targets. What player do you want? And the Rockets can go and specifically target that guy. They also have deal sweeteners, guys who I think that if they did make them available, could open up some real possibilities of trading for some really good players. 2 guys that I would have as examples there, Tari Eason, who was a 17th overall pick, and Cam Whitmore. A little bit under $3.5 million for him. He was the 20th pick in the 2023 NBA draft. I love these 2 young guys. I think that they're both real contributors on good NBA teams. Even now, I think even with how young they are, they're both very, very talented. Cam Whitmore's having a very good rookie season, in my opinion. Tari Eason had an awesome rookie season a couple of years ago, and now I think he's having just another good year. I think he's a freakish player with his size, production, and ability to go get the basketball as a rebounder. You don't see players with his frame and size and build very frequently. So I think those are players that the Rockets need to internally value. I don't think that they will or should trade them, but in case something super big came to fruition for Houston, they have guys that they could throw in there. Again, my suggestion is do not do that, but it's something that's worth mentioning. Now, when we get to trade targets, the very first guy I want to talk about is Mikal Bridges, and this is the type of player that I highlighted earlier, a high-level 3-and-D wing. He fits seamlessly into what Houston's doing, and if you think about kind of the combination of good defensive talent that they already have, Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, of course, Jabari Smith, Jalen Green is playing the best defense of his life, Alperen Sengun is playing the best defense of his life. Now you get a guy who has been an all-defense team member before. Now his defensive play has slipped up a little bit since getting traded to Brooklyn because of his role change, but I think if you sent him to Houston, you're probably unlocking some more of that again with a defensive-minded head coach and a reshaped role where he's given a little bit more comfortability on the defensive end to expend some of his energy there instead of having to be the sole offense creator, the top guy like he is in Brooklyn. And this is an interesting package, and I know Nets fans are going to say this is not enough for Mikal Bridges. First of all, I want to include the swaps. The swaps are not on the graphic, but the swaps would be a part of this as well. Remember, like we talked about earlier, the Brooklyn Nets do not own their own future. The Rockets predominantly own Brooklyn's future going forward. So this is a real, like, hey, the Nets kind of get out of trouble here and regain a lot of their future pick control. They get their 2024 first back. They get their 2026 first back. They also get a couple of second rounders. They get 2 salaries that really don't do anything for Brooklyn here, which is why this makes so much sense for Houston. You get a really great player, arguably one of your best players in the door without having to trade out any of your current existing rotation. That would be a huge win for the Houston Rockets. And the Nets get, again, not only just their 2 first-round picks back, they would get their swaps back in 2025 and 2027. And I know some Rockets fans now are going to say, whoa, we don't want to give them back everything for Mikal Bridges. Again, a couple of things here. You're not giving up any of the young guys. No Amen Thompson, no Cam Whitmore, no Tari Eason. That's a huge home run. And I know some people are going to say, listen, those Nets picks might all be top 10. And you might be 100% right about that. I'm going to tell you right now, it's really rare to find a player of Mikal Bridges' caliber even selecting in the top 10 for multiple years. Mikal Bridges is still relatively young. He's in his 20s. He's a player that I think could fit Houston's timeline, gives even more maturity. He fits the kind of skill set that they'd be looking for. I think he's a very high-level shooter when he's playing off the catch. And I think with his recent kind of run in Brooklyn, being tasked to do a bit more, it probably has opened up his game, makes him a little bit more comfortable, and something I think the Rockets could rely on at times from a shot creation standpoint as well. So not only are you getting an elite two-way player, but a guy who I think is still growing in his own game, probably is finding that comfortability level of, hey, I'm not a number one option on a team. That team's not going to be very good if I am that number one option, but maybe I could be a really high-level number two option or a great number three option. And because of that, I think he fits smoothly into Houston while still amplifying their already very good defense as well. We go into trade target number 2, and this one focuses on Clint Capela. Yes, a return to H-Town for Clint Capela, and this is a package I think works relatively well for both sides. And again, with those salaries that you can aggregate, the Hawks, who are looking to rebuild and retool their roster, they're probably not looking to take in any long-term money, and they're probably looking to kind of reshape around Trae Young and Jalen Johnson with picks. And Capela, listen, good player. At this point of his career, though, I just don't know if the Hawks are going to be able to turn him into anything more than this. With where the Brooklyn Nets are currently, this 2024 first is projected to be a lottery-level selection. And if you're Atlanta, you look at it and say, hey, we're already slated to get our own pick this year. We're going to get the Sacramento Kings pick this year as well from the trade that they made around Kevin Huerter a couple of off seasons ago. And now we get a third first-round pick, this one likely again in the lottery. So you're probably working with 2 lottery-level selections and a pick in the early 20s. That gives you a lot of trade flexibility in the offseason. If you do want to retool, go target a specific player, you now have 3 firsts that you could go out and work with from this draft alone. Or maybe you want to move up in the draft. Let's say the Hawks fall in love with Alexander Sarr. Well, you have 3 first-round picks to trade in a draft that there's some questions about who's the top guy. If the Hawks feel like they've identified that top player and they want to go get him and pair him with Jalen Johnson and Trae Young, they would have the flexibility of doing so. So if you get a first-round pick here for Clint Capela, it's a huge home run because it opens up more pathways. You're still going to get more assets after trading DeJounte Murray. They also have other pieces to trade: DeAndre Hunter, Saddiq Bey, if they go that route as well. We'll see if they go for a total teardown in Atlanta or not. But this also opens up the door for them to play Onyeka Okongwu at center and space the floor around him, see if they can maximize him as well, a former lottery selection that they made a few years ago. And for the Rockets, I think it's pretty simple. Again, you're giving up players who don't really play for you that much, who aren't important, and you're getting a proven good player who knows the organization, knows the owner, he's familiar with the area in Houston. There's not a question of if this fits or not. He's the type of big that would prosper under Ime Udoka because he's a rim protection, roll and cut big. He's able to set screens and get to the rim and catch lobs. I mean, how many times did we see that in Houston with James Harden? Now, listen, he's not playing with a James Harden level playmaker, but I think as Amen Thompson develops, a guy like Clint Capela, his rim pressure would be a really good pairing there. I also think just his screen setting is something that Houston's missing right now. Alperen Şengün, very nice screen and roll guy when it comes to short rolls and playing out of the middle of the floor. Should be an all-star this year, Alperen Şengün should be. He's super talented, but Capela sets a little bit of bigger, stronger screens. He's going to get more space for Van Vliet. He's going to create more space for Jalen Green. And I think he has a little bit more gravity as a roll man as well when he's a little bit closer to the hoop. So because of that, I think there's a lot of functionality Capela provides to Houston that they currently don't have, which is why I think this is a huge win for both sides. The Rockets in this situation keep most of those other Nets assets, still are able to draft more young guys going forward, but they make a smart buy now move on a guy who they have control over and can be a real big time addition, not only this year, but going forward as well. I'm sure he would be comfortable staying in Houston for quite some time. Trade target number 3. This is one that doesn't really help this year as much, but it's a long-term buy move for the Houston Rockets, and that player is Robert Williams III, who is out for this season with another knee injury. And I guess if there's one thing that's going to scare you here if you're Houston, one thing you're worried about that you might say, we can't do this trade, it's Robert Williams' injury history. But if you look at everything else, if you throw the injury history out the window, which it's a very important thing, I understand if you have concerns about it, But if you throw that out the window, you're getting a starting caliber big man to be a backup for you on a very team-friendly deal. Compare that to the Clint Capela contract. Robert Williams is younger and a lot more affordable. And he already has an existing relationship with Ime Udoka. Robert Williams really came out of his shell and became the player we know him as today because of Ime Udoka becoming the head coach of the Boston Celtics. Really maximized Williams as a rim protector, shot blocker. And I think if you're looking for a player who we know will seamlessly fit into what Udoka wants to do on the defensive and offensive end of the floor, Robert Williams is that guy. Now, again, you're not going to get him this season. You have to be patient, wait for him through the trade deadline, through the end of this season to see him finally play Houston Rockets basketball next year. But that might be something worth doing, kind of like when we saw Kristaps Porzingis traded to the Dallas Mavericks when he was rehabbing from his ACL injury with the New York Knicks over half a decade ago now. Again, the cost here is a 2024 first rounder via Brooklyn. And my solution to that is a lot of people would say with that pick, maybe they should draft Donovan Clingan. Well, Robert Williams might just be a better Donovan Clingan. Now, we don't know that for sure, and if Clingan stays healthy and if he develops, he might be better than Robert Williams, but it's a little bit of a safer route here for Houston, and for Portland, you're getting another draft asset. I think that makes sense for both sides as well. You could maybe scraggle over, oh, should there be second-round picks involved? What else goes where, right? Maybe the Blazers give up a little bit more, maybe the Rockets give up a little bit more. This is kind of a basic framework to get the talk started if the Celtics did have interest in combining Robert Williams back with Ime Udoka as soon as this season. Then we get into trade target number 4, and this is perhaps the cheapest buy option on the list, and it's Daniel Gafford, who I do like quite a bit. Now in Washington, he's currently being overtaxed as a starting center. He's not a starting caliber big, unlike Robert Williams, unlike Clint Capela. Gafford's a step or a tier below those guys, which is okay because there's still things he does really well. He's a fantastic lob threat. He's still a good screen setter, and he's a good rim protection big, but he's not as good as Capela or Williams in those areas because he doesn't rebound as well. So he's not a true anchor. He's a shot blocker, and there's a pretty big difference between that. I wouldn't even necessarily classify Capela as an anchor. Robert Williams is like kind of on the border of anchor versus shot blocker. But Gafford to me is a guy who, like, if you're looking for a backup big who's affordable, like $12 million is kind of behind the high end of things there. But I think he's a player that you're comfortable giving 18 to 24 minutes a night to, and that's exactly what the Rockets are looking for here. And the beautiful thing about this one is this asset doesn't cost you a first round pick likely. You trade Jock Landale and Jae'Sean Tate here in this deal to the Washington Wizards, you would still have the ability to make another trade centered around the salary of Victor Oladipo if you want to, and you trade 3 second round picks in this deal. 2024 second rounder via Brooklyn, 2024 second rounder via OKC, so you're looking at a pick here maybe at around pick 40 and a pick in the 50s, and you're also giving up a second rounder in 2025, so no first round pick out the door. You keep that Nets pick, and maybe they go out and still make a trade centered around something like Mikal Bridges or another piece. Maybe this is where you try and incorporate something like Luke Kennard. If you go and trade that salary of Victor Oladipo, maybe you can bring Kennard in if you send out more second rounders, and maybe the Rockets find a quality cheap backup big man in Gafford, and then they also find a shooter in Luke Kennard, or maybe even they rope in Landry Shamet into this Wizards deal and get it all done with just one team. That's an answer too that you could consider. So I think the Rockets are in a great spot. They've got a lot of tradable contracts, guys that teams are going to say, yeah, we can afford taking this salary dump in because they're short contracts. Like I said, Jae'Sean Tate, Jock Landale, there's no real long-term money committed because the Wizards could basically waive Landale and not have to pay him at all. And then they also, with Jae'Sean Tate, could just decline the team option if they didn't want to keep him. But I could see the Wizards honestly keeping both of those guys as well, just given where their team is currently at. So those are things to consider. Now, with my final predictions, I think the Rockets will be active. I think they're going to be working the phones, but they're definitely not desperate. And that's a great thing. That's exactly what you want your team to be going into the trade deadline. You want your team to be hungry to improve. You want your team looking to win, looking to take steps forward, make smart, savvy trades. But you don't want your GM and you don't want your kind of front office in a spot where they feel like, oh my gosh, we have to do something. And I don't think the Rockets are in that situation at all. I think the Rockets are very happy with how they're playing. I think that they're very comfortable with the step forward they've taken this year. I think they're going to take a patient approach, and if something that they like becomes available, if they love a trade that they're able to make, they'll make that trade, but they're not going to just hit the accelerator for no reason. And that's a great spot to be. Again, it's a fantastic situation and they have time. I really hope that because of that, they don't trade one of the following guys: Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore, or Tari Eason. I don't think that they're going to try super hard to accelerate their timeline further. They've already done the hard work by going out and getting Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks. I thought of trades for Brook Lopez. I just couldn't find anything I liked with his salary. But at the end of the day, I for sure see the Rockets adding some big man, whether that be a Daniel Gafford or a Clint Capela, or maybe like a Robert Williams, even if that doesn't help this year as much, because again, I think that they have time to be patient and kind of wait this out. The Rockets are in a great spot, and I don't think that they have to panic or do anything crazy right now, as long as they just are patient and they play their best basketball, which they've been doing this year. They've been playing really, really well. They have more future picks coming. They're going to be able to flesh out their team in a pretty good manner. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, again, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. Go follow us on those socials. Go use that Discord link in the description to join the Discord server. Would love to have you guys in there. Thanks again so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.